Tonight I'm sharing 3 true horror stories that all took place in December. Stories sent to me by viewers who experienced things they still can't explain. Things that changed them forever. So turn off the lights, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't let the silence of a winter night fool you into thinking you're safe. Let's begin. Story 1. The Cabin Rental. This first story comes from a guy named Marcus, who was 26 at the time this happened. It was December of 2019, and Marcus had just gone through a pretty rough breakup. His girlfriend of 4 years had ended things right before Thanksgiving, and he was feeling, well, pretty lost. His friends kept telling him to get away for a bit, clear his head, So Marcus decided to rent a cabin up in northern Vermont for a week. He found this place online, a small, isolated cabin about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The listing said it was perfect for solitude and reflection. And honestly, that's exactly what Marcus wanted. No cell service, no distractions, just him, some books, and the quiet. He drove up on a Sunday afternoon, December 15th. The sun was already starting to set by the time he arrived, which in Vermont in December means it was barely 4 p.m. The cabin was even more isolated than the pictures suggested. It sat at the end of a long dirt road surrounded by dense pine trees that were all covered in snow. The only sound was the wind moving through the branches. Marcus grabbed his bags and headed inside. The cabin was small but cozy. One main room with a kitchenette, a wood-burning stove, and a loft bedroom accessible by a ladder. There were large windows facing the woods which, during the day, probably had a beautiful view, but now, in the growing darkness, just reflected his own face back at him. He spent that first evening getting settled, made some dinner, got a fire going in the stove, tried to read a book, but he couldn't shake this weird feeling, like he was being watched. He kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone standing outside in the trees, but there was never anyone there. Just darkness and snow. "You're being paranoid," he told himself. "You're literally in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's out here." That night, Marcus climbed up to the loft around 10 p.m. He was exhausted from the drive and fell asleep almost immediately. But sometime in the middle of the night, he woke up, and he couldn't move. Now, Marcus had experienced sleep paralysis before, so he recognized the feeling immediately. That terrifying sensation where your mind is awake but your body won't respond. He could see the loft bedroom around him, could hear the wind outside, but he couldn't move a muscle. Couldn't even open his mouth to scream. And then he heard it. Footsteps downstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the wooden floor of the main room. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He tried to move, tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. All he could do was lie there and listen as someone or something walked around the cabin below him. The footsteps moved to the kitchen area. He heard a cabinet open, then close, then another one, like someone was searching for something. Then silence. For what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two, there was complete silence. And then Marcus heard the worst sound imaginable. The creak of someone stepping onto the first rung of the ladder leading up to the loft. His entire body went ice cold. Someone was climbing up, coming for him, and he couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything. Another creak, another step. Marcus was staring at the opening of the loft, waiting for a head to appear, when suddenly his body released. The sleep paralysis broke. He could move again. He shot upright, scrambling backward on the bed until his back hit the wall. He stared at the ladder opening, breathing hard, waiting for whoever it was to finish climbing up. But nobody came. The cabin was completely silent. Marcus grabbed his phone from beside the bed and turned on the flashlight. With shaking hands, he aimed it at the ladder opening. Empty. He waited, listening. Nothing. Just the wind outside and the settling of the old cabin. Finally, after maybe 10 minutes of sitting there frozen with fear, Marcus worked up the courage to climb down the ladder. He had to know if someone had actually been in the cabin or if it was all just a hallucination from the sleep paralysis. He searched everywhere. Checked the front door, still locked from the inside. Checked the windows, all closed and latched. Checked the cabinets in the kitchen. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. It was just the sleep paralysis, he told himself. Just your brain playing tricks on you. But Marcus didn't sleep the rest of that night. He sat in a chair facing the door with a kitchen knife in his lap, waiting for sunrise. The next day he felt ridiculous. In the daylight, with sun streaming through the windows and birds chirping outside, the whole thing seemed absurd. He'd psyched himself out, that's all. Let the isolation get to him. So he decided to stay. He'd paid for a week, and he wasn't going to let one bad dream chase him away. The second night was fine. He slept through without incident. Same with the third night. By the fourth day, December 18th, Marcus was feeling pretty good. He'd spent the days hiking through the snowy woods, reading by the fire, actually starting to relax and process everything he'd been going through. But on the fourth night, something happened that made that first night seem like nothing. Marcus had gone to bed around 11 p.m. He was sleeping soundly when a sound woke him. A loud thump downstairs like something heavy had been dropped. He was instantly awake, heart racing. He lay there in the darkness of the loft, listening. Another thump. Then a scraping sound, like furniture being moved. This time, Marcus knew he wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis. He could move just fine, and these sounds were completely real. Someone was in the cabin. Moving as quietly as possible, Marcus grabbed his phone. No signal, of course. He thought about his options. The loft only had one way down, the ladder that led right into the main room where the intruder was. He was trapped. The sounds continued. More scraping, footsteps, then a voice. It was so quiet, Marcus almost didn't hear it. A whisper, but he couldn't make out any words. Then another voice answered, also whispering. There were at least 2 people down there. Marcus' mind raced. What did they want? How did they get in? And more importantly, did they know he was up in the loft? He clutched his phone, considering his options. He could try to climb down and confront them, but he had no weapon except that kitchen knife, which was downstairs. He could try to wait them out, hope they'd just take whatever they wanted and leave. As he was thinking, one of the voices got suddenly louder. Check upstairs. Marcus's blood turned to ice. He heard footsteps approaching the ladder. In a panic, Marcus did the only thing he could think of. He rolled off the bed and squeezed himself into the narrow space between the bed and the wall. It was a tight fit, and he had to turn his head sideways, but he was mostly hidden. If someone just glanced into the loft, they might not see him. He held his breath as the ladder creaked under someone's weight. A flashlight beam swept across the loft ceiling. He could see it through the crack between the bed and the wall. The light moved around, illuminating different parts of the small space. "Looks empty," a male voice called down. Just a bed." The flashlight clicked off. The ladder creaked as the person climbed back down. Marcus stayed in his hiding spot, barely breathing for what felt like hours. He could hear the two intruders moving around downstairs, opening things, talking in low voices he couldn't quite make out. Then, after maybe 20 minutes, he heard the front door open. Fucking waste of time. Nothing here. Yeah, let's check the next one on the list. The door closed.
Marcus waited and waited. He stayed in that cramped space for at least another hour, listening for any sign they might come back. Finally, when his legs were cramping so badly he couldn't stand it anymore, he carefully extracted himself from behind the bed. He crept to the loft opening and looked down. The cabin appeared empty. Slowly, quietly, he climbed down the ladder. The main room was a mess. Cabinet doors hung open, the cushions from the couch had been tossed aside. Someone had gone through his bags. But nothing seemed to be missing. With shaking hands, Marcus went to the front door. It was unlocked. They'd picked the lock somehow. He quickly locked it again, then pushed a chair under the handle for good measure. Then he did the same with the back door. He didn't sleep at all that night. Just sat in the chair with every light in the cabin on, the kitchen knife in his hand, waiting for morning. At first light, Marcus packed up his stuff and got the hell out of there. He drove straight back home, cutting his trip short by 3 days. Here's where the story gets even creepier. About a month later, Marcus got a call from the Vermont State Police. They'd found his rental information in connection with an ongoing investigation. Apparently, the cabin he'd stayed in, along with several others in that area, had been the target of a string of break-ins throughout December 2019. The police said they believed the perpetrators were locals who knew which cabins were being rented and when. They'd break in, looking for valuables, electronics, cash. But then the detective said something that made Marcus's skin crawl. "You're lucky you hid," the detective told him. "The couple who rented a cabin about 2 miles from yours, they confronted the intruders. Both ended up in the hospital. We still haven't caught the people responsible." Marcus never went back to Vermont. To this day, he can't shake the feeling of how close he came to something much worse than just a scary night. Those men had been perfectly willing to hurt people who got in their way. And if he hadn't had the instinct to hide, well, let's just say he might not have been around to send me this story.
Story 2. The Christmas Temp Job. This next story was sent to me by a woman named Jenna. At the time this happened, she was 22 years old and working as a temp through the holiday season to make some extra money. It was December of 2021, and Jenna had just graduated from college a few months earlier. She was working at a temp agency that placed her in different short-term jobs, usually office work, data entry, that kind of thing. In early December, the agency called her with a new assignment. A small accounting firm needed someone to help organize their records room. The job was simple. They had had a minor flood in their basement storage area over the summer, and they needed someone to go through the damaged files, determine what could be saved, and create a digital inventory of everything. The pay was decent, and they only needed her for about 2 weeks, working evenings after the office closed. The firm was willing to pay extra for evening hours since they needed their records room accessible during the day. Jenna agreed. Her first day was December 6th. The accounting firm was located in an older building downtown, one of those early 1900s structures that had been converted into office spaces. Jenna met with the office manager, a woman named Patricia, who showed her around. The records room was in the basement. To get there, you had to take an old elevator that groaned and shuddered as it descended, or use a narrow stairwell at the back of the building. Patricia took her down via the stairs. The basement was exactly what you'd expect. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, that musty smell old basements have. The records room itself was a large space filled with metal shelving units, all packed with boxes and filing cabinets. One corner showed obvious water damage, warped boxes, stained files. "This is what you'll be working with," Patricia said, gesturing to the damaged section. "Take your time, be thorough. You'll be down here alone most evenings, but my office is upstairs if you need anything. I usually stay until about 7 p.m. Patricia showed Jenna where the supplies were, gave her the Wi-Fi password for her laptop, and left it to her. The first few nights were fine. Jenna would arrive at 5 p.m. after the regular office staff had left. She'd work until about 10 p.m., going through boxes, determining what was salvageable, scanning documents that needed to be preserved. It was boring work, but the basement was quiet, and Jenna didn't mind the solitude. She'd bring headphones and listen to podcasts while she worked. But on her fourth night, December 9th, something happened that made her uneasy. Jenna was deep into a box of files from 2015, sorting through water-damaged pages, when her podcast suddenly cut out. She looked at her phone, thinking maybe she'd lost Wi-Fi, but no, she had full bars. She tried to restart the podcast, but it wouldn't play. The app just kept buffering. "That's weird," she muttered, and took out her headphones. And that's when she heard it. Footsteps. Not from upstairs, but from somewhere else in the basement. Slow, measured footsteps on the concrete floor. Jenna froze. The office was supposed to be empty. Patricia had left at 7 p.m. She'd heard her call out, "Good night," before locking up upstairs. The building was closed. "Hello?" Jenna called out, her voice sounding small in the large basement space. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Jenna's heart was beating fast now. She stood up from where she'd been kneeling by a box and looked around. The records room had an open doorway that led to the rest of the basement. She could see a hallway stretching into darkness. The lights in the main basement weren't on, only the ones in the records room. "Is someone there?" She tried again. Nothing. After a few minutes of listening to nothing but the hum of the building's heating system, Jenna convinced herself she'd imagined it. Or maybe it was pipes settling or the heating system making weird noises. Old buildings do that, right? She put her headphones back in and went back to work, though she kept the volume lower this time. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Footsteps. This time closer. And then a voice, distant, echoing, coming from somewhere in the basement. "Jenna?" Someone had called her name. She ripped out her headphones and jumped to her feet. Her whole body had gone cold. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice cracking with fear. No response. Jenna's mind raced. How did whoever it was know her name? Could it be Patricia, playing some kind of prank? But why would she do that? Grabbing her phone, she quickly walked to the doorway of the records room. She used her phone's flashlight to illuminate the basement hallway. It stretched about 30 feet before taking a turn. Old pipes ran along the ceiling, boxes and equipment were stacked against the walls. Empty. "Okay, I'm done for tonight," Jenna said out loud to herself. She quickly gathered her things, shut off the lights in the records room, and headed for the stairs. As she climbed, she could have sworn she heard those footsteps again, following her up. But she didn't look back. She just kept climbing until she burst through the door into the main floor, which was dark, except for the exit signs. Jenna practically ran to the front door, fumbled with the lock, and got outside into the cold December night. She stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, looking back at the building. All the windows were dark.
The next day, Jenna called Patricia and asked her directly, "Is there anyone else who works in the building at night? Security, cleaners, anyone?" "No," Patricia said, sounding confused. "The cleaning crew comes early morning before we open. Why?" Jenna explained what had happened, though she felt foolish doing so. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Look, Jenna," she finally said, I'm going to be honest with you. You're not the first temp to mention strange things happening in that basement. We've had a few people refuse to go back down there." "What? Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because most people don't experience anything, and we really need this work done. The firm can't afford to hire someone full-time just for this project." Jenna almost quit right then, but the money was good, and she told herself she'd just been spooked. She'd go back, but this time she'd keep her music off and stay alert. That evening, December 10th, Jenna returned to the office. She made Patricia walk her down to the basement and check the entire space before she'd agree to stay. Patricia did, turning on every light they could find. The basement was empty except for old equipment and the records room. "See? Nothing here," Patricia said. "I'll be upstairs until 7 if you need me." After Patricia left, Jenna got to work. She kept her headphones out this time, working in the silence of the basement. Every little sound made her jump. The heating system kicking on, water running through pipes, the building settling in. But nothing else happened. No footsteps, no voices. By 9 p.m., Jenna was starting to relax. Maybe the previous night had been her imagination after all, or sound traveling weird through the old building's ventilation system. She was bent over a particularly damaged box, trying to carefully separate stuck pages, when every light in the basement went out at once. Complete darkness. Jenna gasped and fumbled for her phone, activating the flashlight with shaking hands. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the records room around her. "It's just the breaker," she told herself. "Old building, old electrical system." But then she heard them again. The footsteps. Only this time they weren't distant. They were right outside the records room. Jenna spun around, aiming her phone's light at the doorway. And for just a split second, maybe less than a second, she saw something. A figure, standing in the doorway. Tall, wearing what looked like dark clothing. She couldn't make out any features, couldn't see a face. Just a dark silhouette, perfectly still. Then it was gone. Not like it walked away, just gone. Jenna screamed and ran. She didn't care about her laptop, her coat, anything. She just ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, her phone's flashlight bouncing wildly. She burst out onto the main floor, which still had some emergency lighting. The front door was locked. Patricia must have locked it when she left. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the deadbolt. Finally, she got it open and stumbled outside into the December night. She stood there on the sidewalk, gasping for air, and pulled out her phone to call someone. Anyone. But she didn't even know who to call. The police? And tell them what? That she saw a shadow? As she stood there trying to calm down, the lights in the building came back on. She could see them through the windows. Everything was lit up again, like nothing had happened. Jenna walked to her car, got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time trying to figure out what to do. She never went back. The next morning, she called the temp agency and told them she was done with that assignment. She didn't explain why, just said it wasn't a good fit. They placed her somewhere else for the rest of December. But here's the thing that still bothers Jenna to this day. About a week after she quit, she was curious enough to do some research on the building. She found old newspaper articles from the 1930s about the structure back when it housed a textile factory. In December of 1932, there had been an accident. A worker named Thomas Brennan had fallen down the basement stairs and broken his neck. According to the article, his body wasn't found for almost 2 days because he had fallen after the factory closed for the evening.
The article included a photo of Thomas Brennan. He was tall, dark hair, and in the photo he wore dark work clothing. Jenna swears that the silhouette she saw in that doorway matched the general shape and size of the man in that photo. But she also knows how easy it is to make connections that aren't really there when you're scared. Still, she's never taken another temp job in a basement since then.
Story 3. The Last Bus. This final story comes from a guy named David, and it takes place during December of 2018. David was 19 at the time, a college student home for winter break. He lived in a suburb outside of Chicago, and he'd gone into the city one evening, December 21st, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, to meet up with some friends. They'd met at a bar in Wicker Park, had some drinks, caught up. David stayed longer than he meant to, and by the time he checked his phone, it was almost 1 a.m. He'd missed the last train back to the suburbs. "Shit," he muttered, checking the transit app. His only option at this point was to take a night bus. There was one that ran a route that would get him close to home, but it would take over an hour and involve a lot of stops. His friends offered to let him crash on their couch, but David had an early morning flight the next day. He was heading to visit his grandparents in Florida for Christmas. He needed to get home. So he said his goodbyes and headed to the nearest bus stop. It was cold that night, really cold. The kind of Chicago winter cold that cuts right through your coat and makes your lungs hurt when you breathe. The streets were pretty empty. Most people were home, warm in their beds. David waited at the bus stop, stamping his feet to stay warm, checking his phone every few minutes. According to the app, the bus should arrive in 8 minutes. 8 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. David was starting to worry he'd missed it, or that it wasn't running when finally he saw headlights approaching. A bus, nearly empty, pulled up to the stop. The doors opened with a hiss. David climbed aboard, tapped his transit card, and took a seat about halfway back. There were only 3 other people on the bus, an older woman asleep near the front, and 2 young guys sitting in the back, talking quietly to each other. The bus pulled away from the stop, and David settled in for the long ride. He put in his earbuds and pulled up a game on his phone, trying to stay awake. The bus made its scheduled stops, the route winding through the city. A few people got on, a couple got off. Normal night bus stuff. But around 1:45 a.m., something weird happened. The bus pulled up to a stop that, according to David's tracking of the route, it shouldn't have been stopping at. It was in a part of the city David didn't recognize, an industrial area, lots of warehouses, not much else. The doors opened, and a man got on. There was something immediately off about this guy. He was wearing a long dark coat, and his face was... David struggled to describe it later. Not disfigured or anything obvious like that, just wrong somehow, like his features didn't quite fit together properly. And his eyes, they were so pale, they were almost white. The man didn't pay, didn't tap a card, didn't show a pass. The bus driver didn't say anything. The man walked down the aisle slowly, looking at each passenger as he passed. When his gaze fell on David, David felt his stomach drop. Those pale eyes seemed to look right through him. The man kept walking and took a seat at the very back of the bus. The doors closed, and the bus continued on. David tried to go back to his game, but he couldn't focus. Something about that man made every instinct in his body scream danger. He glanced back once and immediately regretted it. The man was staring at him. Just staring. Not blinking. That same empty expression on his too wrong face. David quickly looked away and tried to act like he hadn't noticed. His heart was pounding. The bus made another unscheduled stop. The 2 young guys in the back got off. Now it was just David, the sleeping woman up front, and the strange man in the back. And the driver, of course. The bus kept going, and David tried to calculate how many more stops until his. At least 20 minutes, maybe 30. He could do this.
Just keep his head down, don't make eye contact, get off when it was his stop. But then the bus made another unscheduled stop. In the middle of nowhere. Literally nowhere. Just an empty street with abandoned buildings on either side. No bus stop sign, nothing. The doors opened. No one got on. No one got off. The driver just sat there, engine idling. David looked up towards the front of the bus, confused. He could see the driver in profile. He hadn't moved, hands still on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Excuse me, David called out. Why are we stopped? The driver didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. That's when he heard it. A voice from the back of the bus. The strange man with the pale eyes. This is your stop, David. David's blood turned to ice. How did this man know his name? He'd never spoken to him, never even... Wait. David hadn't told anyone his name since getting on the bus. His transit card just beeped when he tapped it. No name displayed. So, how... No, David said, his voice shaking. No, my stop is further. This isn't... This is your stop, he repeated, his voice flat, emotionless. David looked towards the front of the bus. The woman who had been sleeping was no longer there. Her seat was empty. When had she gotten off? David hadn't noticed. The door was still open. Cold December air poured in. David made a decision. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. He needed to get off this bus. He stood up and quickly walked towards the front, towards the door. As he passed the driver, he glanced at the man, and his heart nearly stopped. The driver's eyes, they were the same, pale, almost white, and his face had that same wrong quality. David didn't think. He just jumped off the bus onto the empty street. Behind him, the doors closed with a hiss. The bus pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. David stood there, alone, on an empty street in the middle of the night, in a part of Chicago he didn't recognize. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Fuck, he whispered. He started walking. He didn't know where he was, but he knew he needed to find people, lights, civilization. Anything was better than standing there. As he walked, he kept checking his phone, waiting for a signal. After about 10 minutes, he finally got one bar, enough to load a map. According to his phone, he was about 6 miles from where the bus had picked him up, which made no sense. He'd only been on that bus for maybe 20 minutes? There was no way they'd covered that much distance with all the stops. But that wasn't the weirdest part. When David looked at the map more closely, trying to figure out where he was, he saw something that made his skin crawl. The street he was standing on, according to the map, didn't exist. Or rather, it shouldn't be there. The map showed it as abandoned, demolished 2015. The buildings around him, the street itself, it had all been torn down 3 years ago to make way for a new development.
But David was standing on it, right now. He could see the buildings, touch the pavement. He started walking faster, almost jogging now, desperate to get out of this area. His breath came out in white clouds, and his legs were starting to ache from the cold and the exertion. Finally, after what felt like forever, he saw lights ahead. A 24-hour gas station. David practically ran to it. Inside, a bored-looking clerk was reading a magazine. Normal, real, safe. "Hey, can I use your phone?" David asked, breathless. "Mine's almost dead." The clerk looked up, saw David's panicked expression, and just nodded, pushing the store phone across the counter. David called his dad, explained he'd gotten lost, gave him the address of the gas station. His dad, annoyed but concerned, said he'd be there in 40 minutes. While he waited, David sat on the curb outside the gas station, trying to process what had happened. Had he fallen asleep on the bus and dreamed the whole thing? But no,
He was 6 miles from where he should be, in an area he'd never been to before. His dad picked him up, and David didn't tell him about the bus. How could he explain it? It sounded crazy even to him. The next day, David was on his flight to Florida. He tried to put the whole thing out of his mind, chalked it up to being drunk, tired, and spooked. But when he got back from his trip after Christmas, he decided to do some research. He looked up that bus route, specifically the stops it had made that night. According to the Chicago Transit Authority's records, that bus route didn't make stops in the industrial area where David had gotten on, or where he'd gotten off. Those stops didn't exist on the official route. And when he looked up incidents involving that particular bus line, he found something that made him feel sick. In December of 2016, exactly 2 years before David's experience, a college student named James Chen had disappeared. He'd last been seen getting on that same night bus route. His body was found 3 days later in an abandoned warehouse in the same industrial area where David had gotten off the bus. The case was still unsolved. David never took that bus route again. In fact, he started avoiding night buses altogether, because he can't stop thinking about what might have happened if he'd stayed on that bus. If he'd listened to that man with the pale eyes and stayed in his seat. Where would the bus have taken him? And would he have ever made it home? 3 stories. 3 December nights. 3 people who experienced things they still can't fully explain. Were they sleep paralysis? Imagination? Exhaustion? Maybe. Or maybe there are some things that happen in those long December nights that we're not meant to understand. All I know is this. Marcus still can't sleep in isolated places. Jenna refuses to work in basements. And David? David walks everywhere now. Even in the winter. Even in the cold. Because sometimes it's better to face the freezing December air than to risk getting on the wrong bus, or entering the wrong building, or staying in the wrong cabin. So, the next time you're alone on a December night, and you hear something you can't explain, or see something that doesn't quite make sense, just remember these stories. And whatever you do, trust your instincts. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.